Can you see that you're live?
Yeah.
I don't know if we would know.
Yeah, probably. Maybe we don't see
So that green thing up in the corner, is that what it
No,
is? No,
doesn't change.
no.
I remember you pop up on my iPad.
Yeah, on the iPad or your computer, you get that, but you don't get it on the screen.
Well, I have it that you're live.
Okay, as long as you have it, we're set. Okay, good morning, everybody. We're returning the Senate Transportation Committee, and we're going to continue our discussion on the T-bill, H 736. And Anthea is with us this morning, and she will join us. We're going to continue our walkthrough. And when we do get to areas, this will be very helpful. We do get to areas that we're going to need folks that come in. I would hope that the folks would just mention it, and we'll put a little tag outside of it. So Jeannie can schedule our folks for next week as we work through the bill. And there'll certainly be areas that we want more testimony or have questions about. And so that's the way we'll proceed. So yesterday, I think we left off probably at page 27. Does that sound right or no?
Yes, that's what
That's what I got on my sheet, but maybe.
So we basically left off at 27 and then just did like a little bit with section 16 and 17 since that was
Okay.
part of the
Okay.
maintenance reduction.
Okay.
So to recap, and you'll hear, oh sorry, for the record, Anthony Dexter Cooper, Office of Legislative Counsel. You'll be hearing more on this from Chris when he like lays out how the dollars are moving for your charts. But there is a reduction in maintenance, and then that is the funding source for the balance of the things that House Transportation and then the House in
Yeah, I don't.
writ large added.
I personally don't feel we should go there at this point, but anyway, we can have that discussion. But, all right, okay.
So the last two pieces of that,
Yes, go ahead. Dawn.
I just say maintenance, when we think about deferring maintenance and what it means in terms of long-term impact is
Nothing to fool with,
it's not a good place to go and find money for others.
because I think, like I said yesterday.
Unless you think-
confusion about-
Unless you think the amount for maintenance is too high and there's ability to reduce it, but I'm not sure that.
They can spend every nickel they can get. It's not just winter maintenance, it's all the other projects they have to do beyond winter maintenance. So the last thing, it's like.
Yeah, it's almost going backwards, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very dangerous to start
It's
that.
really the maintenance of the transportation infrastructure that is supported and utilized by the majority of, you know.
With these type of historic dollars that we have, it doesn't seem like that's where we ought to be trying to find more money.
It would be my first choice, yes.
Maintenance and potholes as well as salt,
Everything,
plowing,
everything,
everything.
yeah.
Issue.
And in the spring, you go out and you. clean the
Roadside mowing, all
The trees, the rocks that cave down, on the rock slides.
Don't bring up the tree cutting.
Yeah, I've done tree cutting, right? Done tree-
guardrails, those kinds of slope, washouts along the road.
Knocking over mailboxes.
Okay, go ahead.
so the last two pieces there to what some of that money is being used for. In section 15, there is $500,000 state transportation fund dollars is being authorized for the Mobility and Transportation Innovation Grant Program. That is a program that was created 2 years ago in 2020, and this is a re-upping of the funding for it, but it is narrower in that it is only to be used to continue to support microtransit projects that improve both mobility and access to services for transit-dependent Vermonters, reduce the use of single occupancy vehicles, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If you look back at the awards through the MTI grant program from 2 years ago, they were not all microtransit. So this is continue that program, build up the existence of it and the structure there, but the grant awards are only supposed to be for microtransit.
So
And that's $500,000.
how much do we have in before? Because you said we're increasing it but narrowing the use.
I believe $250,000 was put towards MTI in 2020 Action Resolves number 121.
So that's what we've had for the last,
That was
We
one
created
time,
it.
I know, but that's,
and there wasn't anything
2020.
additional last
so
year.
it's been at the 250?
So it was at 250 for 1 year. Nothing was put towards it last year.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things you will
20.
hear from, or I expect that you'll hear, I heard it when they were testifying in House Transportation, and you'll see reference to it in
Who's they? Who would
the
they?
Agency of Transportation. And the reason why I'm not presupposing what they're gonna testify to you, but it has bearing on subsections D and E, is that the Agency of Transportation is working with transit providers to convert fixed route service to microtransit service, potentially as the results of some of the prior grants that were more planning specific. I'm mentioning that, you'll probably want to hear from the Agency of Transportation on that, but that is why there is subsections D and E. D saying that nothing in this section, this $500,000, is supposed to limit the authority of the agency to fund the implementation or operation of microtransit programs using other funding sources, and that the agency may assist public transit providers with converting fixed route service to microtransit service, including using the Federal Transit Administration monies. That language originally had a shall in it, and there was discussion in House Transportation about the fact that there might be service that is not suited for microtransit and is suited for fixed route. So this is, I think, language that is not necessary, but it is underscoring the fact that this isn't supposed to be the only funding for microtransit, and there are scenarios where the conversion should be happening, but the grants are not necessarily through MTI going to be like funding the microtransit, more for the planning and the getting to a point of being able to implement microtransit.
Michelle, we just fought for your. Yes.
This is, I really like the MTI grant, and I think there's a lot of potential for microtransit. And so one of the things, just as clarification, the things that they granted before was the TDM, is that the kind of like the van pools and stuff like that? That's what the type of things that were done before? I think Michelle's nodding her head over there.
Yes, microtransit planning, microtransit implementation, transportation demand management type things,
Okay,
all of those are included.
and this limitation was by the House committee or recommended by,
House committee,
what is
the House committee,
House Transportation Committee
Yeah.
recommended this, or the agency?
the House Transportation Committee.
And the agency doesn't care, or?
The language did not seem to impact the program. What I would say about the program is that we put $500,000 into our proposed budget for this program, and we believe that will meet the demand that currently exists in FY23. That's not to say that as more of these microtransit planning studies conclude and recommendations potentially for service arise, that there may be need for more dollars in the future, but this was not our proposal.
I would like us to consider more money for the program so that the programs that get stood up have sufficient resources. Because, you know, we've run into some bumps in the Montpelier program of just the amount of time and effort it takes to get the switch from a fixed route to this door-to-door service is a lot. And we have some people that are unhappy because it's a tough transition for some folks. And I want it to be done right so it's successful. And one of those things, I think, is different buses. If you take, like, so we're still using the cutaway buses. If there was funding to try to support vans, 15 passenger vans, for example, so that you don't need a CDL, and it's a nicer ride. You don't have the handicapped accessibility as much, but we would have both to meet those, and also some way to meet the rush hour. Some people like it, but except when at 5 o'clock, when everybody's using it, then you're waiting a long time. They liked it better when you could just walk to the bus stop during rush hour because you knew the bus was coming. But now you're like waiting around. And we've also had issues about those that don't have cell phones. How do they participate? They go to the grocery store, they want to call for the ride. They used to be able to just walk to the bus stop that was near the grocery store, but now they have to find somebody's phone to borrow to call. So I think some other funding for these projects is needed or welcome. So if we're moving some money around just as a check or a highlight, this is an area I'd like to fund more.
Okay,
And I just put up on the screen, these are the 2021 MTI grants awarded. If you just Google or something along the lines of MTI grants, you'll find that, and I can see. Anyway, the reason why I put it up was they weren't all microtransit. So there's like an old Spokes Home one, there's the Sustainable Montpelier Coalition, which I think is what you were talking about, Senator Birchliff. So there are a number of different things.
okay.
Okay, and then the last piece to the puzzle of how money is moving around is the House added zero fare public transit as a project in the transportation program. It has an authorization of just over 1.4 million. The implementation language is in subsection C. The agency shall ensure that public transit operated by transit agencies that are eligible under the federal funding sources in the state on routes other than Link Express, so excluding that service, shall be operated on a zero fare basis during fiscal year 2023. And then you have, and we talked about this very briefly yesterday, the report coming back by January 31st of 2023, looking at changes in public transit ridership from fiscal years 2020, 2021, 2022, and the first half of 2023 to estimate the amount of funding that would be needed to continue to provide zero fare transit on the service routes that are in the state. And then that's broken out by county and type of service in fiscal year 2024. So you would have more information to make a decision regarding whether or not you wanted to continue zero fare if you so chose to include it. You could, if you were looking at ways to keep some of this language or get rid of some of it, you could certainly get rid of the reporting requirement. I know there's been sort of a attention to not having more written reports on things that you could just get an oral update on. You could keep the update in written form or oral form and get rid of the 1.4 for zero fare. I think you could modify the language to find a way to provide more flexibility, give the 1.4, but not say it's prescribing that it's going to be zero fare. I think that's something I've heard you mentioned before. So I think there are a number of ways that you could address zero fare in some way with a modification to section 16.
Before COVID, we didn't have zero fare.
I would say that there are some transit providers in the state who have always provided zero fare because they receive enough subsidy from other institutions within their region, such as Upper Valley. They have support from Dartmouth College and Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. And those two institutions encourage their employees to use transit to cut down on parking needs in those areas. And so that's one example.
The ski area buses free?
Not in Stowe. I don't know about the other areas, whether they're ski.
Medical center will provide buses too, right?
So College Street Shuttle has been
Yes, that's
free.
another good
Burlington
example.
would pay an extra assessment because it was just in Burlington. So I would love empowering language to let the board choose some routes that just make a lot of sense because they're very urban and very set. And keep those.
That's what I said, but boy, people are upset with me because.
I think we need to get back to, COVID is almost over. We need to get back to those days of where we are. We need to use this money for transformational changes, not to keep on supporting habits that we're just gonna go back to anyways when the money runs out. And there's not a better time than right now. I mean, when's the best time to do it? Right now, not tomorrow, not the next day, not next year. Let's get back to where we were and use this money transformationally to build the infrastructure that we need to get us to the next big change in our life.
Can I just mention one thing about the funding source for this language is you've heard that there is still federal relief money that's providing some of the rural zero fare But this $1.4 million, this is state transportation fund money. So when you're looking at funding sources and where it's coming from, this was money that was pulled away from the maintenance budget. So this is not
Right.
necessarily, if you were trying to look at the pots of money that are available, this is, you know, the gas tax revenue, this is the purchase and use tax, this is that limited source.
So there isn't, in addition to this 1.4, there is some federal money that's going to support.
I believe they still have for the rural routes, some CARES Act money.
Yes, so for the rural routes, the COVID CARES Act funds are gonna cover the $500,000 fare cost recovery.
And I understand what you're talking about earlier about when they're trying to make it, oh, listen, we want to reduce how many cars we have in our parking lot or on the routes in the city or whatever. If it wants to be a localized, regional type thing, well, that's their prerogative to do. But as a state, we should be not looking to steal money from one place to another. And I think we really need to keep transformational on our brain.
To that point.
Go ahead.
So I'm in agreement, and I'm wondering with GMT, if maybe the way to direct these funds to be transformational, I'd love them to come back, maybe, and if they're watching this, maybe send me an email, but fare boxes have been a major issue for them. It's expensive to put in, to upgrade the fare boxes, but if this money was targeted to let them go cashless, I think that would actually move the football field, the football further down the field. If they could only invest this in the infrastructure, when you were last in New York City, did you have to give somebody $1.50 to get onto the train? No, but there's those places where you pay and then you swipe. So if we enable a cashless infrastructure, and the money is to get to that place of operational efficiencies, and then it's easier to give free fare to UVM employees through the ID recognition or through other mechanisms or taking credit cards. Maybe that's a.
And Senator Mazza and I stood outside a little thing the other day. We could take a lesson on that.
Yeah. Right.
So I believe that doing the transformation to cashless fares would be an eligible activity under one of their federal funding streams. And so it may not cost as many state dollars to implement a system like that as the money that is in the T-bill right now. And so that might be a question for GMT to respond to.
All right. Okay.
Okay, so now we are done with the changes to the white book that the House made. They have as section 17, something looking to your next fiscal year, and it's requiring the Agency of Transportation to consult with the Vermont Climate Council and ensure that within the Agency of Transportation's proposed fiscal year 2024, so that next white book you'll be getting, all federal monies that are available to the state under this new funding source carbon reduction program, which has its codification there, in federal fiscal years 22, 23, and 24 are allocated towards projects that align with the recommendations of the Climate Action Plan issued under 10 VSA Section 592. So this is something that you will be seeing for fiscal year 24 if you keep Section 17 in. You might see it if you take Section 17 out, but this is telling them that this is something that should be included in their plan for the next fiscal year. And part of the reason why you don't necessarily hear a lot about this program is because, and I haven't checked in the last few days, the guidance still has not come down for how the money can be used.
How much money are we talking about?
Oh, I have to phone it.
I forgot.
It's around $6 million a year for the next 5 years, or to the next 5 years.
Well, certainly makes sense that as long as it's a permissible use for the federal funds to use them in a way that supports the state's established policy objectives. Was that something the agency put in or the House put it in?
The House put it in, and my only cautionary note in terms of the administration's budget process would be, as you know, going in from 24 to 28, we are tens of millions of dollars short in transportation funds. And so part of the weighting of needs, because there are a lot of new discretionary grant programs or funding streams, will be, do we have the T funds to match these, or do we only have enough to match things we've already committed to? So that's going to be a pressing matter.
All right, so if you don't have the match, are you saying this basically is saying these would take priority for the T-fund dollars to match these federal funds?
That appears to be the
That's my
case.
understanding.
The way this is written is it's obligating T-fund money for the match here.
Well, you also, though, remember, you can't bind the future General Assembly, so.
I know, and we notwithstand everything
Yeah.
routinely.
So what you could end up happening is you get your transportation program that meets the requirements of section 17, but then you also get, and I'm not telling the agency to do this, but I think they would figure it out on their own, a side letter that says, hey, if you were to not withstand section 17 of your last T-bill, this is how we would actually like to use our limited T-fund dollars. But you told us that we needed to make sure we were using all of the carbon reduction program funds that we could draw down with our state non-federal match.
I'm not understanding what you're saying, because this is federal money, so why are you saying that it's?
So it's federal money, but there's a non-federal match requirement. So if you're looking to your out years, and Chris and Michelle can do a better job in this.
Okay, so if you have to spend the federal money on these, you would have to use the T fund to match it.
Yeah.
So that's where the T fund money would be.
I'm a little apprehensive about making, because we don't know what that future is gonna look like in terms of, in terms of, it makes sense to align it, but on the other hand, we're making a decision now without knowing for the next 5 years what that fiscal landscape or,
Well, it's not 5 years, it's only.
well, shall ensure for
You could also
23, 24.
you could scale it back and you could say that any of the money that is used from this funding source shall align with the cap, but not require that they
Well, that's what I'm
fully
thinking.
utilize it. So to your point of saying, like, it would be great if we aligned it with our state plan, you could align it with the plan without requiring that all of the money be drawn down.
It's the shall ensure all federal monies are drawn down. That's basically what it's saying.
Well, I guess you could say they're not available if we don't have the match. Because it says all federal monies that are available.
Yeah,
I guess that's.
but the way I would read it is all of the available federal monies, we will ensure that the state match is there to draw them down. That's how
You're requiring that the agency program it in the white book to that end.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't like undo it in committee before it's eventually adopted.
I think the agency could make an argument that they're not available if they don't have the state money to match it. But I guess they would always have the money, they would just have to take it from something else.
that's what I'm thinking is inherent in that is that's the first and highest priority for the T-fund dollars is to pony up the match to fulfill shall ensure all federal monies are available are allocated. Now, I suppose you could argue they aren't available if you don't pony up the match. Or does the insurance mean that you're gonna find that match so that all the federal available dollars are drawn down? How do you interpret what's there?
So again, this language is not saying the final adopted transportation program needs to do this. It's saying that the agency needs to, in its proposed white book, fully allocate what's available under the carbon reduction program, which means when they're programming it, they're gonna have to find the state match. But then if they come in and they say, this is the white book that we made to align with section 17, but because of that, we're not gonna be able to have the state match to do X, Y, and Z, then you would end up potentially having a bunch of those charts in the T-bill saying, amend the white book in these ways. You also then, and Senator Pritchett, you didn't specifically reference section 1, subsection A, but that always says to the extent that federal, state, and local money is available, this is the adopted transportation program. So I guess arguably if you over-programmed it, then it's not available and then they don't have to do it under that subsection.
And can you, I'm sorry if I missed this in your preamble, the carbon reduction program. It's only monies that are available in the state under that program, so. you just learned the program.
I don't know if there's a great one-line blurb, but what there really isn't is there isn't the guidance as to what will be eligible under it. So there's sort of some
This is-
guessing as to what might be.
US AOT money system money said there was 6 million a year that's estimated.
5 years.
This is a brand new formula funding stream being made available through the IIJA, through FHW at Federal Highway Administration.
And no guidance yet.
There is no guidance yet. I do expect that FHWA will require states to provide a plan on how they're gonna spend that money down. But last time I checked was probably about a week or so ago, and I did not see any guidance yet released for this funding.
So is there a deadline on that?
I don't, but on the available,
On the carbon reduction program, or is it just like a continuing program, or is it like for the next 5 years?
my understanding is the funding is available for each of the next 5 federal fiscal years. And the funds are usually available to draw down for up to 3 federal fiscal years after the fiscal year that you get the money. So it's sort of, people talk about a 5-year federal funding, it's really kind of 8 years when you think about it like that.
And is this why we can go 23 and 24, where we're not binding, I mean, we really are binding the next cycle of legislators, but because the money has to be, is able to be spent during those times, that's why we can, if wanted to, we could use this type of language.
Well, again, I'm gonna go back to, you're not binding anyone but the agency in what is in that white book, because they proposed the transportation program, and then you adopt it except as you amend it. So that's what all of those sections that we were seeing, like the reduction in the maintenance, that certainly wasn't something that the Agency of Transportation, based on testimony for the last 2 days, wanted included in the white book. But this is saying, this is what you need to include in your white book. This is what we want to see from January of 2023 program 4. And then it's up to you through your legislative process to actually adopt a final transportation program.
But we're putting language in and then we're saying, but, we aren't going to be bound by it. On the other hand, what we put in, we ought to be clear what it's doing. And to me, shall ensure that their plan, all federal monies available
In this
Which
program?
to this program, which means I'm almost reading it is shall ensure that all monies available are allocated to projects. Now, I would read that is the federal monies are available and we have to, and to ensure that they are spent, we have to pony up the $1.2 million match. And maybe I'm not, and that, or you can read it the other way. So I don't think the intent's clear.
I think it needs to be clear. I think the language should be clear so that you're not getting somebody in trouble later on down the road saying, well, hey, listen, why aren't you doing that? Well, because I interpreted it this way. Well, no, we're interpreting it that way. It should be just, it should be easy language.
So does the House intend to say out of the T fund revenue, the match will be available so that all federal monies available are allocated, that are eligible under the federal, we're drawing it down, are aligned to the projects. So that's my question. Was the intent in the House to say our first priority is to obligate 1.2 million T fund to make all those federal dollars available to do the projects that align with our climate action plan?
So what this language requires, and I think from a practical perspective, when you think about all the work that goes into the agency preparing the white book and how little you really have the capability of changing because there are specific projects and it's divided up that way, the white book does not change a ton. So to the extent that there will be practical and logistical difficulties for you a year from now to be changing the white book as it's proposed by the Agency of Transportation, this is really setting the train in motion for all of this money is going to be spent, that's available, you're gonna need to have your state match, and you're gonna need to have it go towards projects that would fall in the line under the cap.
What you just said indicates that by putting this in, our intent is to say to the agency, you've got to fund this 1.2, find the match, use it for projects that will not only fit under the federal use of the funds, but align with the climate action plan. So in my mind, that's why I'm asking, was the intent of the House to say, we want to put out of all the different things that we're doing and the ways in which T-Fund can be matched, this is we want to dedicate the match for these projects.
So I think that you should hear on the intent side from House Transportation, and this was language that was suggested by the chair, and I'm sure she would love to talk to you about the intent behind it. But what it doesn't say is that all of the money will be used in this way. It says, agency, in your proposed transportation program, tell us how you would, meet these requirements and use the funding in this way. So if we are sort of looking at a spectrum of intent, this does not say in the letters on the page, we are going to do this, or it's our intent. It's telling the agency to do something. And then what you do with that a year from now, I think could end up in a number of different ways.
So Michelle, how would you read that? If you've got that language and you have to, how would you take that and interpret and apply it to the work into your proposed program, 24 transportation program?
So I would interpret it that this is the highest priority for the agency to get these monies programmed. In terms of, it doesn't say the state shall match. So what I would do with this, if I didn't have T-funds, is I'd create a grant program to municipalities and any other deemed eligible entities who are doing things in the realm of the climate plan and make those monies available. That would be my solution to not having the T-funds.
And
I'm confused.
so that
I'm okay with the language because
my head
we'll
right
see
now.
what the agency decides to do. We can change it. They can even tell us like, well, the language said this, so this is where we're doing it, but this will mean we're not matching this over here, or we're pushing the match to the municipalities. I think it is a good goal, and it's something that we want the agency to think about. I mean, we've talked about how we're not raising any of the fees, and that's causing pressure other places. This would be a way to remind them that there is this pressure on matching all the federal funds, and that they should be trying to maximize that. And this is the
I don't have any objection to the intent. I'm just wanting to be clear what we're obligating ourselves to do. That's
Jim, go ahead, clear it up for us.
Are we not talking about raising the fees, or are we?
there's no fee bill this year
Or for the best.
or for the past 5 years.
I was told the legislature can do whatever the legislator wants.
We can. We could raise fees.
Okay.
But it has to go through ways and means, or we could put a fee in. We wanted to deal with the vast shortfall. We could say,
Sure.
we don't have the 50,000 to give you for this, but we'll
These should
give you
automatically
higher rev.
raised over the years automatically, and we wouldn't have to address them all the time, but
And-
that's not gonna happen. It's just, it'd
Well-
be nicer registration every 3 years, go with $2 or $3 or whatever, but, or whatever, it just.
And people don't, no one said to me, thank you for not raising my
No,
license or
and a couple
registration,
bucks.
$2.
It's a lot,
You know,
it's nothing.
But you add it up and it's a huge amount of money that is not available to support this. So,
There are so many people who still buy license plates with their names or something else, $24 more, and they don't bother with that, so another $2. Registration was 76 now, it was 79, who cares? I mean, it's once a year.
nobody's saying thank you so much for
No.
not raising my
No.
whatever $3, but
Go ahead.
I'm a big fan of rational assessment, so I would just say add a fee to the car registration that pays for public transit. Those are people that are choosing single occupancy vehicles, and I would think they should subsidize multimodal transport or consolidated transport, so.
And you've got a real equity, rural, urban
Oh,
problem
you
there.
don't have one. The guy that knows if you see a bus once a month in that area, you're gonna help pay for your bus.
Well, the poor
It's okay.
slob on Newark Ridge who has no choice but to drive to
If I
Lindenwood.
wanted to take a bus in Colchester, I couldn't take a bus. If I wanted to.
They
in
wouldn't
Colchester-
even pick you up.
So I mean, and I'm the second largest community in Vermont, yet we have no bus service.
Can we limit it to commercials, a commercial vehicle registration or by county? So if you register a car with a home address in a county served
Well,
by public
technically, we're
transportation.
funding public transit now through that mechanism.
Then you get. a
As
county
part of our
plan, you want-
overall
you wanna
plan.
vote for the 14-year-old Brattleboro, now you're saying
For us to pay for my buses.
Russ hasn't seen a bus up in his area since he's been there, for crying out loud.
I saw Sasquatch before I saw a bus. He was looking for the bus.
Russ said, what are you guys talking about? Is that some big
They're
thing?
still hitchhiking.
Yeah, he was out there like this. Yeah, I said, oh, he's either from Newark or he's a Sasquatch. I didn't know. I didn't stop.
Before Russ came to Montclair, he didn't know what they were, you know, now he's seen one, he asked me that day, what's that big thing with the windows on the side? I said, that's a bus, Russ. Okay, good. All right, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Well, all right, so I think the expression is good. I just was like, what are we obligating? But if you think that there are flexible ways so that, that you can do it, then fine. I just wondered what the intent was from the House. I guess I would have to ask a chair.
Could ask the chair, but I mean, I know I can talk,
We must have. I'm sure I chimed in, and, you know, I think that the biggest issue here is that we don't know what the guidance is.
I know.
And until we see the guidance, you know, who knows how we can comply or if we can, I mean, I assume it's gonna be something that is going to be able to be advanced, so.
I think aligning absolutely makes the greatest sense. Of course, you want to use any available funding to support whatever benefit or service or public goal you have. So I just,
A lady came into my store last night, she said, I understand your monthly, or I said, yes, and she said, I just want to tell you that I've been in my apartment complex for I don't know how many years. I was paying $917 a month, and she said, the new owner took over this week and said, May 1st, my rent goes to $1,700 a month. She says, what do I do? I said, you know, I can't, it's a $900 increase or whatever, $700 increase. And she said, you know, I'm all by myself and I can't do it. And I said, you know, I wish there's no answer to this. That's what's happening.
Try
You're
to
buying
get your-
properties.
see if you can get a Section 8.
Well, that's what I said. She said, they're 3 years behind.
Yeah, I'm sure they're just in short
4
supply.
years behind on that. And, you know, I felt so bad for her because, but on the other hand, that's what's happening in our area. And it's not as bad probably in your area, but when they start
I
talking
don't know, it's
about
interesting, the House in Caledonia County
really
was
inside,
one of the top two.
wow.
Who said that yesterday,
It
Rusty?
was on the floor, Senator Sharakin.
Yeah, I was quite surprised.
But he said he sold a house yesterday for $115,000.
Yeah.
You know, come on.
I'm moving ready house. I mean,
Yeah.
not to get it off the subject, but I don't have lots of housing, but everybody says, well, can you find a house? Can you sell it? What do you want? Tell me what you want. I'll find you one. You know,
Amazing. 115,000, you couldn't even buy a bus. It's just, you know.
Can we put on this house? You'd say, son of a gun, are you serious? 150, yeah, it is.
What town are you in?
Oh, Orleans. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I know we're off the subject, but that's all right. Go right ahead.
Well,
What
sorry, that's
do we want to do in
what
this section? Anybody want
I guess it's okay,
I'm
to let
okay
it
with
go.
I'm-
As long as,
I'm with Jane as far as if she's fine with the language. I don't even care what the subject is. I like clear language. I like to know what we're agreeing to, what it is. So if somebody's asked, no matter what it is, well, just read it. It's clear.
to, if we
the agency will read it the way they have to read it.
we're gonna have the chair anyway, go through the bill, maybe she can explain. We'll have the chair in probably. I thought that was a good idea, just to run through the bill, maybe she has an answer for us. Okay, All right, go right ahead. Move on.
Okay, so section 18, you talked about this one already. You had me in on it. This is changing for the Transportation Alternatives Grant Program, taking out some language that related to a prior fiscal year. And then for fiscal year 2024 going forward, instead of having it be 1.1 for the environmental mitigation projects relating to stormwater, highways, including eligible salt and sand shed projects, and the balance going to the other eligible uses, it's 50% unless the applications are for a lesser amount. There is more money, this is all federal with a local match, and there's more money available for the Transportation Alternatives Grant Program going forward through the IIJA. So it's updating it from its current amount and then tying it to a percentage.
Yeah, yes, right.
The different things are allowed in this program is I always remember, whenever I see this, I think it's something else. With transportation alternatives, I think it's something else.
Yeah, it's not really like an alternative form of transportation. I know that salt sheds are a big thing that you got like permission to use the money for environmental mitigation projects. I know that there is a slide deck that I've seen, at least in the House, that sort of looked at the breakdown of the projects. And that's going to be the extent of my knowledge, but I know there.
Right now, it's mostly stormwater, isn't it?
We did have a period of time where it was mostly stormwater dedicated. And then we came back to a 50-50 split, which is what you're seeing here at those funding levels, which was our standard funding level before the reauthorization and the new federal transportation bill. And so we are going to have, instead of about 2.2 million, I think I was told it was around 5 or 6 million annually. And so when this came up in the House, and the idea of continuing a 50-50 split between bike ped and, you know, I think there's some historic transportation purposes that are in that category. And you can also do clean water related projects.
This says 50% will be clean water. And you have any opposition or suggestions on a different title for this program?
That is the federal title for this program.
But yeah.
End of discussion.
It's not like the new program for EEVs or whatever.
Just
We don't
because
have
we
to
said we
really.
created it, but we created it so we could get the federal money.
Mhm. Yeah, it's sort of like the food stamp program, right?
Okay, again, I'm gonna go through this one a little bit faster
So
because
50% for stormwater and whatever the balance should be used in accordance with subsections.
yeah, and Senator Kitchell, you did not like the preferential weighting being given to projects involving as a primary feature a bicycle or pedestrian facility.
I didn't?
You didn't like that there was only that like one criteria there. I have a note from the last time we talked about this. I think I took a note. Oh, I thought I had taken a note on it.
I don't remember having responded on that, but
Because I know
maybe I
said-
should have one.
It's existing language, you're not-
Now that you seem to be channeling my thinking, huh?
Well, I can go back and look on YouTube to refresh my memory on it. But I think it was the preferential weighting was being given to just this one then criteria. Just the phrasing of it, I think you thought could be cleaned up a bit.
Well,
And then also the fact that it was done at the complete discretion of the agency for the amount of weighting.
how much, we're talking about $5 million here now? To be reserved for,
I do remember that discussion.
so 50%, wait a minute, just walk this through, so 50% of the, in this case, $5 million shall be reserved for environmental mitigation, stormwater, right? So
Unless the applications are lower than that. So if they get applications for $1 million, they wouldn't need to have 50% fee. for that use. And then the balance,
The remaining 50%.
or larger if the interest was lower for the
For the
environmental. Yep. And then it goes to any eligible activity, and there it would then fall to the federal requirements with the priorities in subdivision 2, which is just this preferential weighting for this one type of project, sole discretion of the agency to determine the weighting.
Well, the reason I want to tie this back, obviously, one of the areas that we've been funding, and that's VOREC, which does a lot with bike paths and trails. So this would be a source of funding for those kinds of activities that communities might like. I know the town of Pownell, for example, got a VOREC grant, but I'm just thinking, if we can't give VOREC all the money that, you know, might be dedicated to them, there's still this option with more money available to municipalities to apply under this for those activities that might connect bike paths and sections and so forth. Am I making a connection here that is right, or am I?
It depends.
Well, of course, Michelle.
I believe that this program would require that there be a transportation nexus, so you couldn't use it on the long trail or the Catamount Trail or any trail.
No, I was talking about
Bicycle, yeah. If it's a bicycle and not a recreational bicycle activity, then I would expect that this could.
So what do we mean by a bike or pedestrian facility?
A facility, we just use that term, it would be a sidewalk, it could be like the Burlington Bike Path.
It could be a path, it could be.
It could be, but I'm just saying that I think VOREC is more expansive in terms of the things it funds.
I didn't mean that it was
Yeah.
exactly the same. I'm just saying that this in fact could be another funding stream for municipalities that are trying to connect the trail that gets to school or connects to, you know.
This program and the bike ped program and another one, small sidewalk grant program, something like
Yeah,
that.
I know that there usually is a lot more demand for the bike ped funding.
And if you go on your committee page to March 15th, you will see a listing out of eligible projects. I just put up the slideshow.
Yeah, abandoned corridors for pedestrians, nothing, you know, it looks like you could.
Wild Valley Trail.
Well, that's already funded. Every town is gonna be a hub. They all think they're gonna be the hub, and it's like, I don't think every town on that,
Mine goes across the lake, a beautiful, best in the world.
well, you're gonna be the hub.
How about, yeah, who has a bike path across the lake? Wow.
Well, who has a drawbridge?
Whoa.
Ooh.
End of discussion.
Who has a covered bridge?
Well, I have a covered
We already
bridge.
have covered bridge.
No?
Not
Sorry.
a single one.
Sorry.
We can cover the drop.
Replace your ride. I know one thing, we're getting to the section of E, electric bike, $200 incentive.
So we talked about this before. I'll go really quickly. Sections 19, 20, and 21 for that $50,000 authorization for the $200 grants for the electric bicycles. There was nothing put in for administration expenses. This is going back to the last T-bill and drawing $5,000 from replace your ride administration, which was $150,000 or $300,000 for replace your ride administration, reducing that to $295 and saying that the agency can use $5,000 to administer the $50,000 in grants for electric bicycles.
Who come up with the 200,000 for electric bikes?
The $200 for electric bikes, I think that was in House Transportation, the
Oh,
amount.
that's where it came from. Okay, it wasn't yours, Michelle. Thank you.
But then we only had it in Do we have it last year's?
So the last year T-bill said it was the $200, it said it was the $50,000, and it said eligibility criteria, and then it was entirely silent on the administration piece. If you're thinking about what language is in the T-bill, this T-bill for this, you know, the subsequent fiscal year, and I'm sure this is going to get changed around, but the $1 million for the e-bikes has 15% administrative costs being allowed to up to. So you could be having your $150,000 going to administer those incentives. This would be saying for the $50,000 that's already been authorized, you can have $5,000 to administer.
Are they going to be the same program?
Well, the program is supposed to be started in fiscal year 20, the current fiscal year. So it's not up and running yet. I don't know.
$5,000 to administer $200.
So Michelle, are you expecting to start that program before the fiscal year ends, and that's why you need $5,000 to administer?
Yes, well, no.
It seems.
$5,000 won't get you very far, Michelle.
I know. The program is expected to start
You
before.
kill the program, you're better off.
So the program is expected to start before this fiscal year ends, and the program will extend into FY '23. So the carry forward funds from the $5,000 would be used for the administration of the entire program. And because we're starting up this program from scratch with the Center for Sustainable Energy, I would say, you know, I don't know, but probably we'll need the full 5,000, but then if you continue to fund e-bikes going forward, then the program is stood up and we're ready to go.
So is the 5,000 going to the center?
Probably it'll all go to the
And
center.
we have to have it retroactive for a member of the committee. That's gonna cost more money to have it go
He's
back.
gonna get 200 on his
He's already lost
$350 bike
$50
or whatever.
Yes, go right answer.
I'm gonna say this for the audience on YouTube, but I am not supportive of this, and I would support just not having a $200 rebate for e-bikes. But if somebody convince me otherwise, I don't know
You're
where.
not supportive of the $5,000 admin or the $200?
Both.
Both.
So if they had the $200, you wouldn't want to give them admin?
You don't make the admin move if you don't have a benefit.
I'm just not persuaded this will achieve our goals. I see much more support in putting $1 million in the electrical infrastructure for people with e-bikes that go in greater distances so that they can charge on remote locations, but I'm just not persuaded.
I agree with that.
It's such a, I just don't get it, because number one, we're not replacing gasoline engine, I've said this before. Number two, they said, well, it's for exercise. Well, if it's for exercise, get it on regular bikes. The other one that exercise, electric bike doesn't, you ride a bike,
Those older riders.
I'm nuts about this one. It's only 50 grand, but, or 50, but it just, they don't open the door.
That makes a charger someplace else.
It's a million next year.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's the fundamental question. If you had $1 million
Yeah.
to move toward climate,
Would you put sort of
change,
electric bike?
where would you put this in the scheme of things?
Infrastructural change where we can.
Well, there's no, you're not replacing a gasoline engine. That's
No, I get it.
Like a car, okay, but a bike, you're not replacing a gasoline engine.
Well,
And
it's,
I feel bad for the people that bought it.
Well, I think,
Anybody in particular?
No, I'm just thinking of generally, you know, someone who already bought one. Plus, the price went down, it cost $1,200. It went down $50. That's $100 for the poor consumer. Okay, go right ahead,
I
Okay,
think this Representative McCormick was probably insurance. Because
Maybe
he
that's where
doesn't,
it come from.
he
Yeah.
doesn't use a vehicle at all.
Does anybody want, other than here in the house, anybody want to talk about this anymore, or you want
I want to talk about where we would move the money.
to? You got, no, that's fine, but I
If
think.
it's,
you need any
or if
more-
we kept some, but not at the $1 million level, where would we wanna?
so for purposes of these three sections, if you were to take out sections 19, 20, and 21, that has no bearing on the $1 million for e-bikes, you would be sort of maintaining the status quo from the last e-bill where there's still the $200 incentives, the $50,000 for it. The Agency of Transportation wouldn't have any money to administer it. And that $5,000 would stay in the bucket of money that can be used to administer the Replace Your Ride program. So that's what would happen if you deleted the three sections.
Well, we accepted it and we built it in.
We can just have it somewhere.
I think the 5,000 makes sense. it might also make sense to give us some experience with this program.
We already approved it and they've already designed it, right?
It's under design and.
So I think it's kind of hard to stop it at this point because it's a decision we made last year.
But I agree, $1 million is more than people.
We designed it last year for what? What did we do?
We put in the funding 50,000 to
For electric
provide.
bikes?
Yes.
We
yes.
did last year?
Yes, you agreed to it last year.
50,000?
What the hell were we drinking?
You put it, you agreed with everything in the house, don't you remember?
It's far away. That was my fault.
Oh, yeah, that was your fault. You didn't have it at conference.
Yes, you did. You three were on it. And you agreed to
It's
everything.
all on Zoom, so it's just all blended.
It wasn't brought up very thoroughly. I never would have.
So what you're saying is leave the 5,000 with the 50K that we approved last year, but just.
I don't
let's
see
not
how we
do
can-
another million.
Well, then we can give them the money to administer it based on what we put in last year, but then.
Auditors get to go.
But that doesn't preclude our ability to look at, in 23 and beyond, do we want to accept the million, or do we say, we would rather spend 500,000 of it, or
So
I
you
don't
could've
know,
gone on the
900,000 of
As
it in
long-
different ways.
As long as persons this March are eligible for the $200 of that 50,000, then.
He should have got it then?
I think that's what he said.
No retroactive incentives under the program, so. once-
Even though you're delayed,
Yes,
startup.
exactly.
Well, I heard he's gonna take it back.
He's gonna do a trade-in.
Give it a layaway, give it a layaway to this program.
He's got that $200.
He has the platinum level membership. which
They're a lot, they're a lot.
Oh, man. Oh. Well, I think we should give them the 5,000. We made that decision to have 50,000, and they need some money. The center is gonna need some money. And I think at this point, it's hard to say, oh, well, oops, we changed our mind. No,
Go ahead.
Can you remind me, Rochelle, did the governor's budget have any money in addition to the 50,000 from last year for e-bike?
It did not.
Well, you
I'd shoot him out.
replace your ride.
Replace,
Right,
I didn't take that.
No, not just the standalone.
Yeah.
Right.
No standalone money.
I told him, you have an electric bike, what the hell you care? You pump your bike all over the state.
yeah, but he's getting older and he may.
You don't want an electric bike, I can tell you that.
There's one other.
Yeah, he rides about 1,000 miles when he can. I mean, he's got time now, but when he had the boat in my area, he'd take his bike from Berlin, or drive, ride over there, go on a boat a couple hours and hike back with the bike, one day or afternoon. I mean,
Yeah, they did that.
you do that?
No, I don't do it, but yeah, I can do that. Yeah,
Okay,
you're welcome.
we only got 10 more minutes because I'm told we're having a joint session.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. 12:30, right?
Oh, it's 12:30.
Yeah, the caucus of the
Oh,
whole.
okay, it's 12:30. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so section 22, we talked about this one already. This is the last of the going back in time,
So
changing.
did we agree that on the 5,000 to administer what we put in place? I think,
But not the million.
not the million, no, this is just the 5,000.
The administrative cost of the existing.
Yes, of what we agreed to last
We
year.
might as well start it out this way. Jane, you're right, we're gonna do that.
Makes life easy,
I'm
doesn't
not
it?
gonna- that's all right.
You agreed to it last year, Senator.
I don't remember what I ate yesterday. Jesus, James, come on.
Oh, sorry.
I think it's your memory. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. You know what I mean?
Oh, my God. Oh, all right.
Just take care of the police car. That's all you gotta worry about. You know
I
what
took care of them for
Yeah.
you years ago.
No, the police car this year.
Oh, that police car. Oh,
Yes.
no, I'm not, I told you, I'm gonna ask for a legislative management committee. I am not making that decision.
Why? See, now you're not making a decision. You want me to make a decision. You're not making.
I think the management committee
No.
should weigh in.
get their attention. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's quite all right. So section 22, this is the last of the going to the prior T-bill to make changes, and this is for the multi-unit dwellings, the charging stations there, saying that they can be level 1 or level 2. So there was a little bit of ambiguity in terms of what chargers the program would cover, since it was only in the section heading and not in the text of the section. And then in working to get the program ready to go, and I know you've heard from Bronwyn about the applications that they're expecting to receive, they determined in figuring out the programmatic guidelines for those grants that there would be times where a level 1 charger would be appropriate, and they would want that to be eligible under the grant program. And this section originated with the agency. This was not a House Transportation addition.
What is a level?
It's really just a plug.
I was gonna say, isn't it just a plug?
So,
This is a level 1 charger, right?
so we would want to try to
So why would you,
we wouldn't try to upgrade that to at least a level 2.
I mean, what is there to subsidize an outlet? Could you explain that?
I can.
All right, thank you.
So this was something I learned following the authorization of this language last year when we were starting to talk about the program implementation. There are now level 1 device plugins, which would allow for a person, a landlord, to place these plugins and have the cost of the electricity be individualized to each plug, kind of similar to what you have at a charge point thing out here.
Sub-meter.
Sub-metered, yeah, I think essentially. And I'm no expert here, Dave Roberts would be able to talk about the technology. So when we learned that, and additionally thinking about level 1 as a plug-in in an apartment complex where there may not be electrical conduit out to a place to put level 1 would be another application where we would want to be able to provide level 1 service. So in light of that, we recognize that having both options available through the program would be appropriate given what we learned about the technology and thinking about the applications.
So just adding level 1.
Clarifying.
Let's see, let's close that out.
If they were to sub-meter it, would we need, I think we would need legislative language to allow such submarine sub-metering. Or if you remember, we had some language about camping areas, RV camping areas are allowed to sub-meter, but we needed language specifically to allow that.
I think, and I would need to go back and look at the language, I think you fixed this with the, I'm trying to figure out if you fixed it with the sale of electricity piece that was recommended by the PUC.
Right.
I don't know if there needs to be a sub-metering thing, and we're getting out of my limited.
Right. So
No,
I just remember we talked about that before. People are going to be selling electricity to people's cars if they run afoul with the statutory language around the PUC that does not allow you to sell them.
Right, and then there was an exception saying that if it's just for electric vehicle supply equipment, then it does not just in and of itself subject you to the jurisdiction of the PUC or the Department of Public
As long
Service.
as we get that.
I think you fixed it when, in response to that first PUC investigation about how to increase access to electric vehicles, you got that letter early in session, and then you addressed it where it was the fix to make it so that the charging stations could be selling electricity by going at the kilowatt hour and not just at the time that you were charged it, if you were plugged in. And I think that probably, and Michelle's nodded. So I think you were probably covered in terms of that sub-metering.
Okay.
So are you closing this out?
I think based on what we know.
Section 23, I believe you talked about this, but this, yes, you did, because there was the question about whether or not it should be pilot or going forward. But this has to do with ensuring alignment and the integration of municipal and state bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure deployment, a framework for municipal prioritization. This originated with the Agency of Transportation. I can talk about it more, but I think you've heard from the
Yeah,
agency
the
on
question
it.
is, why do we need a pilot? Seems like these are kind of principles we should integrate in just normal work and planning.
Yeah, I mean, we would agree with that. We weren't sure how this would be received, so we staged it as a pilot in the language, but we'd be fine with just moving forward in this framework as we go into the future.
Just seems like that makes sense.
You know, we're talking about airport pilots, all right.
Okay, so
Different kind of pilot, huh? And pilot payment in lieu of taxes. So we have pilot and pilot and pilot.
So I will rework this to be not a pilot, but if it's not going to be a pilot, do you want this one report?
We want one.
Cross off this report.
No,
report.
no, get rid of the report.
One less report.
So the language you'll see next will have it reworked to not be a pilot and no,
Change the heading because it's got pilot, yeah.
and it has
Oh, is it the last for section 24, pedestrian safety outreach?
I know.
What?
Yeah.
Oh,
this originated with the House. I think it was a little
Physical safety, yeah.
bit of a compromise from some language that would have been a pilot program from another bill that was on their wall.
how do you develop outreach to pedestrians?
Signs up with QR codes. We did that separately.
Local motion didn't jump on our bike safety at all. They never go back.
I mean, what are you supposed to do? Obey the walk signs and use the crosswalks?
They're sober.
So it's-
Right, stay sober.
In South Burlington, we wanted to pull pedestrians in certain intersections, and so we've got yard signs with QR codes. Please scan this and answer a survey. So they would be walking along, they scan it, go into a survey page, and give us feedback. It worked. We got some pedestrian points feedback.
This is outreach information.
Jeez.
It's about funding and the programs that would be available to communities for pedestrian safety. So it's not necessarily outreach information directed to pedestrians.
We told Russ get some intersections across.
Oh.
Anyway, I'm waiting for my street light.
I don't want to derail where you are, just doubling back to the section 29 and grant programs for multi-unit dwellings. We heard from V-Trans, and I'm just hoping that after the April deadline for the grant applications come in, I'd love to hear how many applications there were and how that overlays with the funding levels, because I had my other role in the South Burlington City Council, there's great interest in making sure these units have charging stations. So I'd love to know how this works.
And I will just sort of put a little tickler in your ear. Do remember that even though it is not in the T bill, there is in what came over from the House in the big bill, the $10 million going to ACCD for charging stations, and one of the targeted locations for them is multi-unit dwellings. So to the extent that you're about to put $10 million or some other amount towards charging station infrastructure, that is one of the targeted locations. So I think the information that you will get on uptake will be useful there too. The language moved, but it was part of this $19 million package of deployment of infrastructure. Okay, so you've got your pedestrian safety outreach. It's pretty straightforward.
So let me ask, this right now has AOT with an MOU to ACCD. What you're saying now,
Where are you?
I'm on page 34. So the question is, in fact, now that we're funding charging through directly to an appropriation to ACCD, is all this work gonna just sort of migrate over to them and not have to have that memorandum of understanding? And it just says, you got the appropriation, you deal, and you're out. So my question is, well, is it just for this year, or?
So remember, this language is here just because you're making changes to the amount of money that went to it for the current fiscal year. So this language does not carry into the fiscal year 23. $2 million
And
appropriation.
that's what my point is, that this actually will be, this is a time limited arrangement and ACCD's got the funding and they're gonna take over. Rather than this two parts where you do an MOU.
And we'll continue, just for clarification, to have a multi-agency technical advisory committee, so public service, natural resources, AOT, I don't know who else is in there, BGS, all have staff who are technical committees to this effort.
There's also sometimes included the language was like the interagency work group for UBSC.
You're more into that than I am. I mean,
Can we take a quick break? I drink too much coffee. You're the chair.
Where are we at a good place?
So if you say anything about pedestrian safety outreach, the next thing I will say is, and then you have all your transportation board sections that you went through in sort of painstaking detail. And if you then say, we don't want to hear about that again, that will get you all the way to page 47. If you want to get from page 35 to 47 before your break, you can do it really.
And when are you on, Chris?
As soon as I'm done.
Whenever the chair requests.
Okay, well, let's take a break and then maybe we will talk about whether we want to, there's the chair. If we want to try to get to more, well, I don't know if the goal is to finish this or.
So I believe after you get through your transportation board language, you then have on-premises signs, which you talked about, that's the measuring not along the center line. You've got your changes to the fees and the subsurface stormwater system. You heard from Joe on that. You heard the change to the letter that needs to come back, and Senator Kitchell was interested in maybe having some clarification there. You then have your smuggler's notch language, which you heard a lot about. All of your municipal restrictions for covered bridges language, which you heard a lot about. You have your electric vehicle supply equipment repeal, and then the reporting coming back, and I worked on language for you, Senator Kirchliff. You got your relinquishment of Route 207 extension, extending that by 10 years. Then you've got just a few technical corrections, and then you're done. So the balance of the bill, you've already talked about, and in most cases heard from the Agency of Transportation or VLCT or other entities. Section 24 was basically the last of my new, you haven't heard from me on these sections.
And then we have my amendment.
Yep.
As well. So obviously.
I've also got some, I'm having copies made of that bike safety packet I got, so just everybody can have it. So I'd like to do some small thing.
So
on
what do you
bike
want to
safety.
do? Expand that pedestrian to bike? As
Well, I
well?
mean, I think bicycles are important. I just don't
Maybe
know.
we do need to hear from people.
That's what I want. I just think we owe something to, because bicycles are getting very popular, and I'm not against them. I want to make that clear. On the other hand, yeah, my.
So section 24, instead of just looking at pedestrian safety outreach, we should look at bike pedestrian safety.
Well, I want you folks to look at that packet they got from the university about bike safety, and then you don't have to make a decision right now.
Well, this is really just a,
Another study.
no, not necessarily.
Are you thinking a study or are you thinking?
I don't know. I brought it up for discussion with the committee. We talked about it, and if we're gonna have more electric bikes, I think that's great. On the other hand, there is zero anything to do with safety. I talked to Locomotion when they never got back to us.
What is,
It's not a concern to them, so I just think it's an issue, but maybe it isn't an issue. I think.
no, I think it is the question. This
I
wasn't
don't
your
know where to
language,
go with it, or-
but what would the agency, because that's putting more work on the agency to do
Yeah,
both bike and ped
we don't wanna do a whole bunch
safety.
of stuff.
So quite honestly, the information that would be provided with this language already exists on our website. And so all we would do is send the web link, RPCs. And I don't think this information is hidden anywhere, and I think towns know where to find it, and regional planning commission certainly know where to find it. And so I don't know that it's necessary, but
What about the governor's highway safety in terms of work that they do? It seems like
We haven't had
maybe
that
that's a
information.
logical.
well, there's probably a nexus related to pedestrians on the highway right of way. And so, yeah, they have a role in this as well.
Yes, go ahead.
That might be where we might want to get them in and talk about the bicycle safety. We haven't had them in at some point in time to cover
usually have
safety.
Talk about
They do have, no, I don't think we have this year.
No.
We've had in past years because they did, funding for A-Ride, and there was, at one point they were doing some investment in the lab and so forth in terms of their budget. I was just wondering whether, we're really concerned about, pedestrian vehicle, within that vehicular kind of environment, which to me gets into the highway safety efforts to not only for pedestrians, and,
Well, you're a perfect
And
example. How old is your daughter?
13.
13. She could take that bike today and go to Rutland with it or anywhere and without any training whatsoever and ride on the highway and be legal. I just, that bothers me. I don't know.
She wants to go further under scarier roadways because she's not worried to get tired.
Right, right, yeah.
It's braver to go further distance.
Thank you.
I'd love to pass a law that would tell my daughter she cannot go in the roads until she's 16 with her e-bike.
Good
Or date.
Good fun of date.
Or date until she's 30.
Good fun of date.
She can date after she's married.
that's a typical,
So there was a request for a break.
Yeah.
it's always damn men around. You remember when you were a teenager, and that should be frightening, right? As for me, I was a goody two shoes.
Do we want a quick bathroom break? That's what I hear.
I don't know.
I don't know, because we have to adjourn because you gotta have lunch if you're gonna go on 4:30.
Yeah.
How you wanna handle it?
Maybe now's a good time to break,
Okay,
have lunch.
we'll break permanently or just break, because we only got, Chris has been waiting for us.
Mr. Chair, I can also be here tomorrow morning. That was on my calendar, so don't schedule on my.
Well, that, everybody gets a little time for lunch.
Maybe that's good.
Okay, good.
I'm
Thank
good
you
with
very
that.
much. Meanwhile, if you could pick up some notes for Jeannie that we can schedule for next week, if you think of some things that we're gonna have to listen to again, or we should have the chair of the house in.
I think Michelle is probably more of
Okay.
the
Yeah,
go-to
why don't you do
person
that,
for
and, we'll get the chair and have her go through the bill out of courtesy. For further, at least she can, yes.
I'm trying to interpret the tone of the conversation. Do you want me to work within Thea to draft language to restrict under 16-year-olds from riding their e-bikes on highways?
I don't know, is that where we want to go, just on e-bikes, or?
Just the fact that they can go further. Or bikes, okay, yeah, bikes, any bikes, I'm with you. Under
No,
16.
I'm
Well,
not,
I
I'm
think
not saying. I
that's
support it.
difficult, I think, because sometimes, on state highways, kids are having to bike to school. I'm just thinking, Russ, up in your neighborhood, there are gonna be kids in villages that would
I
be
just
on.
like to hear I just like to get some safety.
I think,
I don't think that's gonna make it safe, just have a prohibition, although it might help you with your discussions with your
What
child.
about requiring training, permit, and have to wear a helmet?
that's why I'm thinking maybe the highway safety.
Let's get the
Like,
highway
we should
safety
do
at
some-
first.
Or they could do some
Yeah,
work
I
to
can-
help
I
us
can-
the
study.
later October.
I think in favor of getting highway safety into,
We'll schedule that, please.
just make sure that we are not.
Yeah,
If
I don't want to
we're
get
gonna
ahead of
visit
it.
it, let's get
They
everybody's
have some
opinion. on it.
ideas about what they have for information, expertise and data that can help us determine what's the right response here to
Right,
the.
I just don't want to jump into something.
I
Yeah.
Also include local motion.
Sure,
Because
yeah.
they're doing
We
safety
have-
outreach and
I mean,
education.
they run the bike, not they run the bike place, but they have an interesting major role in bike safety, I'm sure, because local motion is supposed to be they got paid staff.
Does the Old Spoke Home do any safety stuff?
They may, but
Old
very,
Spoke,
very focalized to the Burlington folks, I would say. I mean, if you want to learn about what's being done.
yeah, if they have a safety program and are doing it, maybe have John Kopens come in, he's could just walk down the block, so it'd be, or.
Mandate the installation of bike safety equipment as soon as sale.
I just, like I said, I received that 6 to 8 months ago, and I want to go through it, I went through it. Okay, all right, we'll break until 12:30.
Chris, I need to grab your brain here for a minute.
Senator Mazel,
That's a good question.
Jeannie, I got your email asking about who was presenting. I don't know.
Yeah, we
So I
can,
would- I
we
would
could
like that
emphasize,
Wait a minute,
like
excuse
the
me,
allow level one, but we should say.
excuse me, I
Priority.
need to know whether I need to stop.
That's
myself.
I'll get their attention, Jeannie, hold on.
Let's push them forward, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What, no, just like if you're planning on it, let me know, share come and I'll see if I can get some.
Especially if you're getting, you know, dollars.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So it could be, there could.
We're all
some people
off the
allow
line.
because there might be some
Because
situations.
Judy needs to